This report is not due for public release until tomorrow. And so I know that some in the media did receive leaked copies of the report. And so I'm somewhat limited into the extent I can go into, because I don't want to talk about the report's conclusions in great detail until that report's been released publicly.
State Department Deputy Spokesman Mark Toner from earlier today reacting to the Inspector General's report, finding that Hillary Clinton did in fact break the rules by using her private email server. Something we need to talk about with the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio, who joins us via Skype tonight from Capitol Hill. We should point out for the record that Jim's also a member of the House Committee on the Judiciary, the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, and he's a member of the Select Committee on Benghazi. So he is smack dab in the middle of all of this. And Jim, we really appreciate your time tonight on Newsmax Prime. Hey, the chairman of the Select Committee, your friend Trey Gowdy, weighed in on this IG's report. His written statement says in part, there is only one reason why these facts are now available to the American people: thorough congressional oversight, including the Select Committee on Benghazi's insistence that any truly comprehensive review of what happened before, during, and after the 2012 terrorist attacks in Libya must include public records from the former Secretary of State and her senior staff. So you guys laid the groundwork in terms of process. And today we had that kind of sad and sorry spectacle of Mark Toner going back to process saying, gee, I really can't comment on it because there's not been a public release. Are we ever going to get a straight answer from either Hillary or the State Department or anyone in the Obama administration?
Probably not. But, look, he told us what we already knew, that what she did wasn't supposed to be done. So there's no surprise there. The frustration has been, remember, first she sets up a private server, then we find out she has it, and Trey's right, we find out largely because of work on the Benghazi committee. We find out she has it, then we want the emails that are relative to our investigation and that the country and Congress are entitled to get, and she says, no, I get to screen them first. So she screens them first and says which ones are private, which ones are work-related, 60,000, it turned out to be roughly 30,000 each, according to what she told us. And then she says, of the 30,000 that are work-related, I'm not giving them to the committee, even though we subpoenaed them that relate to Benghazi. I'm giving them first to the State Department. They do another screen before we even get them. So, I mean, this is typical for this administration, typical for the Clintons. They seem to want to slow walk and take their time and put up roadblocks all along the way. So nothing new here, nothing that we didn't, frankly, already know, that what she did wasn't the proper way to do things.
Jim, bottom line on Hillary, does she basically believe she is above the law, that she's too big to answer for the consequences?
Well, here's what I know about our work on the committee, on the Benghazi Select Committee. She had this arrangement, which the State Department now looks like they're saying wasn't supposed to be the arrangement that you're permitted to have. Second, we know that on the night of the attacks, September 11, 2012, 4 Americans give their life for our country. We know that what she said privately was entirely different than what she told the American people. She told the American people that night, she blamed it on the video, said, some have sought to justify this vicious behavior as a response to inflammatory material posted on the internet, which always sort of raises the first question, who in the heck talks like that? Seems to me only people trying to not be straightforward with their audience. Because what we know that she did less than an hour later in an email to her family, specifically her daughter, she said, we know terrorists killed 2 of our people tonight. The next day, probably more telling, JD, is she said to the Egyptian prime minister, we know the video had nothing to do with it. It was a planned attack, not a protest. So an entirely different message that she's saying privately, straight talk to the truth, than what she's communicating with the taxpayers, the citizens, and probably most importantly, to the families of those 4 individuals who sacrificed so much and gave it all for our country.
Jim, Trey Gowdy in that statement talked about thorough congressional oversight. Obviously, that is the constitutional charge of the legislative branch, given our separation of powers. And yet another committee on which you serve had yet another Freudian slip, Obama administration official really, rhetorically speaking, in the crosshairs. I'm talking about IRS Commissioner John Koskinen, who didn't even show the common courtesy to show up when requested before the House Judiciary Committee. Your friend and mine, Jason Chaffetz, the House Oversight Chair, testified to your other committee, the Judiciary Committee, calling for the impeachment of John Koskinen. Let's listen to what Chairman Chaffetz had to say.
Mr. Koskinen did not tell the truth to Congress. He provided false testimony and failed to comply with a subpoena. He could have prevented evidence from being destroyed, but he didn't, and he didn't tell the truth about it. And there can't be full accountability because the evidence was destroyed on Mr. Koskinen's watch and under a subpoena. The remedy given to us in the Constitution is impeachment.
And that remedy is impeachment, so the question's fairly straightforward. Will the impeachment of John Koskinen go forward?
I think it will. And that's certainly what I'm pushing for, what Chairman Chaffetz are pushing for in the resolution. Everything the chairman said in his testimony is accurate. And frankly, if I were John Koskinen, I wouldn't show up either. Remember the facts here, JD. He was brought in the president's words, not my words. In the president's words, John Koskinen was brought in as commissioner of the IRS to restore the confidence in that institution. He has done anything but. The chairman is exactly right. He breached every duty he had. He had a duty to preserve documents that were under subpoena. He had a duty to produce those documents to Congress that were under subpoena. He had a duty to disclose to Congress if he couldn't preserve and produce. He had a duty to disclose to us in a timely fashion if there were problems complying with that subpoena. He had a duty to testify accurately, and he had a duty to correct the record once it was discovered that he testified in an inaccurate fashion. All six of those duties he breached. The standard for impeachment is dereliction of duty, gross negligence, breach of public trust. I think by anyone's definition, he satisfied all three of those measures. And for that reason, he should be impeached. And this is just relative to the subpoena on the targeting scandal that took place there. There are a host of other problems at the Internal Revenue Service that John Koskinen oversees that need to be brought to light as well. But the thrust of the matter is his failure to comply with the subpoena, the fact that he allowed under his watch 422 backup tapes to be destroyed, containing 24,000 emails, and he waited 4 months to tell Congress before such activity actually took place.
Jim, as you sum these things up, I think a lot of conservatives around the country are heartened because of your articulate and very complete presentation. And while we're having this conversation in terms of a television interview, yesterday, there you were on the dais and you were laying it out there. Let's go back to what you said during the committee hearing yesterday and take another listen.
For goodness sake, this is certainly breach of public trust, dereliction of duty, and negligence in gross form.
And it is so gross, I guess the question is, in addition to impeachment, if a witness comes and lies to Congress, that's perjury. Yeah. In your opinion, should Koskinen end up behind bars?
Well, here this shows you just how I think poorly our Justice Department is run today. It's my understanding the Justice Department didn't even interview John Koskinen in their criminal investigation of the targeting scandal. He was interviewed by Treasury Inspector General Tigda, but not interviewed by the FBI or lawyers of the Justice Department. So come on, here's a guy who didn't comply with the subpoena, didn't comply with 3 preservation orders, and they don't even talk to the guy. So I mean, look, that's the hard part. We have to do what the Constitution gives us the power to do. When you think about this administration and how they have overstepped executive authority, executive orders, and on and on and on it goes, the way you begin to rein them in and restore the co-equal branches of government, restore balance of power, is for the legislative branch to do something that hasn't been done in 130-some years, and that is impeach a high-ranking official in the government who has breached their public trust. John Koskinen fits that definition to a T. This is the way we can deal with the IRS and all the problems there, deal with what they didn't do relative to that subpoena, not complying with it, and also, maybe most importantly, reassert the authority of the legislative branch. And so for all those reasons, we should move forward, and for all those reasons, we should impeach him and leave the trial to the Senate. That's what the Constitution sets up. We impeach, the trial is actually in the Senate, and they're the jury, they make the decision.
Fair enough. A couple other decisions have to be made in terms of politics, presidential politics. Speaker Paul Ryan, who you championed to take on the Speaker's job, has been reluctant to endorse Donald Trump. There was some talk earlier today he was going to do it, and then the staff said no. What is the Speaker saying, and what are you saying about Donald Trump's status as a presumptive nominee?
Well, we should unify around the nominee. We should unify around Mr. Trump. And look, he's a lot closer to our position on the Second Amendment. We saw that last week in his speech in Louisville to the NRA. He's a lot closer to our position on protecting the sanctity of life than Secretary Clinton. Last time I checked, Cecile Richards was introducing Secretary Clinton at rallies, at events around the country. So on some fundamentally, he's a lot closer, I think, on dealing with the
Pardon the
issue.
interruption. Pardon the 10 seconds. I think you're the dark horse for Trump's running mate. If he asked you, will you accept that? You're from Ohio, and you can take the fight to the other side.
There's no way that I'm in consideration for that, and I don't want to be vice president. I want to continue to fight for the things we talked about here in the House and do things like impeach John Costigan because he deserves it, and we can begin to reestablish our authority in the legislative branch.
Fair enough. Congressman Jim Jordan, doubtful, he says, that he might be considered. I'm not so sure about that. Jim, we thank you for the considerations of your time and spending a good bit of it with us tonight from Capitol Hill. Thanks very much.
Take care, brother.
Back with more right after this.